So, Shayn, I believe you're gonna share your screen for the presentation, but just to kind of get us going, I want to say thank you so much. My name's Kevin Christopher. I am here today with Shayn Fernandez. We also have Andrew Lerner, who has contributed to the presentation, but he's not going to be available today. We are part of an IP and technology focused law firm. What we think is really interesting is scaling technology, helping entrepreneurs grow something out of a lab or a university or out of their own dreams, and scale, work with investors to bring something to life that is for the benefit of the public. And so within that space, we have compiled some team members who have a lot of backgrounds that are relevant for today's talk, particularly SBIR, whether it's commercialization experience or helping startups to partner with different institutions, secure government contracts, reviewing SBIR applications as part of the technical and commercialization panels of the different SBIR agencies, and working within startups ourselves. So we understand kind of what this space is about and how SBIR funding in particular fits into the broader portfolio of funding options and growth options for early stage companies or for companies that are launching new products and getting into new markets. So I am, Shayn, do you have your screen up?
Yeah, I'm gonna just do a quick little introduction and then I'll switch over right now actually to screen share. One second. But yeah, I'm Shayn Fernandez. I'm kind of the corporate lead here at Rockridge Venture Law. And my background is spent a lot of time in DC kind of doing securities and M&A work for defense contractors and government contractors at various agencies there. So bringing that over to Rockridge and combining our experience working with some more of the civilian agencies. But yeah, I think this is going to be a great little chat today on kind of the nuts and bolts of SBIR, STTR. And we'll go over, so the point of this discussion is we're going to go over the general overview of the SBIR programs quickly. We know that everybody here kind of has maybe a preliminary association with the SBIR program, STTR program, but we're going to spend a little bit more time on the nuts and bolts. So we're going to try to cruise through the overview of topics early. Here you can see kind of just Kevin, myself, and Andrew. It's a little bit more about us, and if you want to contact us through our Calendly accounts. So let's just kind of go over the, the initial, I was a tech issues. Okay. The initial why of what we're talking about, what the SBIR program is for. And so it kind of deals with this quote right here of it supports science excellence and technological innovation through the investment of federal research funds and critical American priorities to build a stronger national economy. So the key there is that when we're talking about the SBIR STTR program, we are talking about the funding of innovation from the federal government. And the whole purpose of this innovation funding is geared towards innovation and actually commercializing the innovation there. And it's not for fundamental sciences. So what is it we're talking about? We're talking about non-dilutive funding. So we're not talking about debt financing or equity financing or anything like that. We're talking about funding that's not going to impact your cap table. These are usually in the forms of grants or contracts, and the various agencies handle things a little bit differently when it comes to grants or contracts. So the Department of Defense, usually, all their awards are going to be contract vehicles, and the distinction there we'll touch on a little bit, but contracts are going to be a little bit more specific on what the government is looking for and what the scope of the work is, whereas grants are a little bit more open-ended. So and this is just kind of a general statement, and don't look too deeply into this, but grants usually require a more thorough exhaustion of innovation, of really focusing on what innovation looks like and what the agency is looking for and what you plan to do. Whereas contracts are a little bit more specific, a little bit more narrow of approach of following what it exactly is that the government is looking for. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because in a contract, it's a little bit more specific. And the general purpose is the government's trying to get something for them to use. Whereas a grant's a little bit more open-ended. It's for the national economy to use this innovation. So the commercialization effort in that respect needs to be a little bit cleaner. We're also talking about innovation and commercialization. That is the core of everything, right? So it can't just be some type of fundamental science or some research that you'd like to do. It's got to be about whether there's a market for this, whether that's a private customers or whether it's a federal customer. You have to be able to demonstrate the commercialization and the innovation aspect of things. It has to be something that hasn't been done before. It's not something that you've done before. So there's been some questions that we've seen about, do you have to have a patent? And actually the answer is no, you don't have to have a patent, but it's more so of, can you have a patent? I mean, yes, you can already have a patent on the technology to an extent, but this is for new innovations. This isn't for something that you've already kind of commercialized and you're trying to open up some more research dollars for that. It's a three-phased approach. And I mean, it's not really true. Basically, there's some other subsequent phases to the phase two. There's also some cross phasing. So for instance, you give a phase one with the Department of Agriculture and then a phase two with the Department of Defense. So it gets a little bit nuanced there, but generally phase one, you're going to have some money coming in, a small amount of money, usually around capped about $250,000. And then phase two is much more like a traditional seed round financing and close to $1 million. And phase three is, it's not really necessarily a phase, it's more of a sole source award vehicle for working with a particular agency. And so you see that commonly with the Department of Defense. Retention of IP, we'll discuss this a lot more in detail as we go about, especially in the end slides there. But the key core to, one of the cores to SBIR funding is that you're able to kind of perfect and keep your intellectual property rights. And as we'll discuss a little bit later, that trickles downstream too when you're talking about team members and subcontractors and what you need from them. So who does the SBIR program apply to? We're talking about applicants here. So an applicant needs to be a small business, and it has to be a US-based small business. And it has to be a small business, so there can be certain socioeconomic versions of small businesses as well. And depending on the SBIR, STTR program, those are two different portions of really the same program, kind of talks about the role of the research institution. So when it comes to STTR, the role of a research institution is they're a fundamental player there. You need to have a research institution involved, and you need to have an IP agreement between the research institution and the applicant itself. But with an SBIR award, really a research institution is just a team member, it's a subcontractor that really is the benefit of your application. So it's not necessary, it's not a necessary party. Another key participant there is the principal investigator. We had a lot of questions about principal investigators, who can be a principal investigator, and it depends on the agency, the real deep down core of it, but generally speaking, for the SBIR program, it needs to be a full-time employee of the applicant, again, the small business. With the STTR, you get a little bit more latitude, whether that's going to be a research institution employee or a small business employee. But again, you're going to have each agency has a distinction on how much time someone has to spend with the company or with the applicant or the awardee in order to qualify as a principal investigator. Usually with a startup, that's going to be the founder of an SBIR program. If it's a more research and development shop, it might be somebody that's brought in as a consultant or a core team member for this particular opportunity. The agencies, so SBIR has 11 agencies that are involved. They have the ones listed there as well as the ones below, and the STTR is only 5. We'll talk about this more a little bit later with the university policies, unless Kevin, you want to jump in now, but that's important to, I guess, to think about when choosing your team members and choosing your research institutions at the outset.
Yeah, so just a quick comment on that. When you are thinking through, say if you're on the business side, or if you're a PI within a university, it is important to understand what your own institutional policies are around the dissemination of information, around certain employment policies. Some of these different agencies, for instance, the DoD in particular, and aspects of the DOE that deal with national security infrastructure will have certain requirements about citizenship, about dissemination of information. And so if you are working with a university partner, or if you are a university PI, or if you're using grad students who might be foreign citizens, then understanding on the front end what those limitations are before you get too far down the road in your partnership and in this application effort. Because you don't want to run into a situation where your university will just not allow for the receipt of a subcontract or participate in an STTR based upon what you plan to do with the research, or who you plan to use as part of that research.
Okay, when? So we're going to actually send some material, whether it's a link or whether it's some hard copy of, or link to some hard copy of the dates here. But this is really, really, really important. As you can see, these opportunities are not available all the time. I mean, there's application periods that range for a couple months. So when you're starting to get things rolling, you should take a look at kind of the expected target customer that you're going to have as far as the granting institution or the contracting institution. By institution, I mean agency, and get an idea of when their dates of release are going to be, and also take a look at some of their prior awards to find out what types of things that they're funding, because generally the topics get released a little bit earlier, and you actually have an opportunity to engage with some of the program managers to find out like what they're actually looking for in that topic. Again, generally speaking, some of the agencies like the Department of Defense, they only do contracts, and they're going to be a little bit more limited on what they're looking for. They're not going to give you as much latitude on the topic, whereas the Department of Agriculture, Department of Education traditionally are going to give you a little bit more latitude on determining what it is that you can present to them. So depending on that situation, you might want to spend some time and putting together a timeline, spending time speaking with the program manager on the topics. Where? So this is kind of goes hand in hand with when. Where you find these opportunities, sbir.gov. You can use the solicitation search engine there. Every agency website has a designated area for this. Department of Health and Human Services has a lot of different programs that come through there. So there might be multiple websites that are kind of applicable there. Betasam.gov. So this is more of not necessarily for SBIR funding, but for government contracts in general. And I don't think, I mean, you can't really find opportunities for SBIRs at betasam.gov, but you can start getting an idea of what the core government buyers are looking for, and that's the Department of Defense, really, and seeing what types of things that they are looking for to kind of think through what it is that your project's going to look like. There's an interesting app that I've seen lately called Fed Scout for, at least for Apple, the App Store, that you can use to kind of browse through different opportunities. So I'm going to turn this over to Kevin, and we'll probably go back and forth, and we're going to try to get to the slides quickly here, but I'm going to turn this over to Kevin.
Great. So let me just kind of start back from a high level position here. The SBIR and the STTR, we're just going to group those together. They are distinct for different reasons, notably what level of effort a particular company or institution, academic research institution, must put forth towards the funding program. But let's just lump those together within this overarching interest by the federal government, by Congress, that funding is going towards building an economy, building and encouraging small businesses who can become suppliers to certain federal agencies, for important products and services they need for national security or for operations, but also for public benefit. So this funding is an investment by the federal government in small business. And so there's a requirement that the funds need to go to businesses who are actually going to commercialize something. These aren't going to repeat SBIR shops where their whole business model is just to get SBIR grants over and over and over. They're not designed to go to sort of pie in the sky ideas of well, I'm much like, say, for instance, some of your NIH grants, which are really just fundamental science. These are looking to approach something that is a little bit more upstream or has legs to get upstream a little quicker. And so in terms of how you apply, what's your sort of first foot forward? If you're coming from a traditional academic space, this is going to be a very different process than your normal application cycle for federal funding. So the first part of this is engaging a team. So what is that team? Well, if you're a small business, hopefully you have some sort of team that you've built to develop your product. Now, you may not necessarily have the team in place to support this kind of program. So examples of that, the SBIR funding goes to really anything under the sun. A lot of different businesses, products, services can fall within the scope of innovation. And I've seen everything from hypnosis material, so just pure educational material, to video games teaching kids how to brush their teeth, to therapeutics, to medical devices, to truck bed liners. I mean, it can be really anything that is some sort of innovation upon what's known and what's out there in the marketplace. However, you might not necessarily have the team you need to commercialize something in the way that the program managers are looking for. So engaging your team, if you are a small business, so if you're under 500 employees, maybe you have an interest in licensing something from a university. And so you're going to want to either bring funds in and subcontract those to a university. And the university then really becomes part of your team on your application. Or within an STTR application, you basically are both sort of pitching your different qualifications for this team. So this is going to be a major component to the application. Who is the team? What's the likelihood that this team can really take this research, take our investment to market? And so you want to have good backgrounds, good, strong profiles, both on the technical side and on the market side, because it's not just about, well, we have a team full of people who have accomplished all these things. They've published in all these journals, but they've never taken anything to market. That's not going to really help you much in securing SBIR or STTR funding. The process behind how an application is reviewed is different among the various agencies. But some of the larger agencies all include public members on their review panels. So this is a little bit different from normal academic grants as well. So the NSF, the NIH, the DOE, they are actually bringing in people from the outside, technical panel members and commercial panel members, people in the industry, people who've seen what it takes to bring a technology to market. And they are coming together and they are reviewing these applications, they're ranking them, and they're advising the program managers on what should and what should not be funded. And so the things that they're looking at are, who is this team? Can they really take this and commercialize it? That is the main purpose behind the funding. So remember that in building out your team. Remember other aspects of teaming, like the various federal clauses that flow down to your subcontractors. DEAR clauses from the Department of Energy, DEAR, FAR clauses, Federal Acquisition Regulations, You have different sets of regulations that apply to the awards that are made by these different agencies. And some of them can be quite complex with respect to ownership and permissions. And remember, if you bring in $99 and you subcontract $1, then all the rights within those federal clauses are going to flow down to that recipient of the $1. That means ownership in inventions, ownership in data, permissions, all of that's going to flow down regulations. So be sure that you're picking the right team members, that you have a good plan behind your IP strategy, your data strategy, because that's an important part of this. You need to understand, as a small business, you want to be able to control all those assets to take something to market. Another aspect of team is covenant against contingent fees. That basically means that there are some limitations to how you can promise certain consultants some portion of the contract that you might receive for helping you to get the contract. So Launch Tennessee, fantastic partner. One of these offerings that they have to Tennessee businesses is in the form of this micro grant. They will help identify a good partner for you who can help you write an application. Well, there are also commercial providers of that service across the country who may offer to secure you funding for a percentage of whatever your grant is. You have to be very careful with engaging in those types of conversations, because there are limitations from the feds on how that funding can be distributed. And that could even go to equity promises. I've kind of touched upon the evaluation criteria and the review process in terms of what is the main purpose here. The main purpose is to move the needle closer to commercialization. So when you're applying, that's your strategy. It's about setting up how this funding, this $150,000 you're going to give me, or this $1 million you're going to give me, is going to move us closer to a commercial success. Some of the best possible aspects of your application are in the letters of support. So as a reviewer, when you come to the review process, so essentially you have a program manager, and he or she will invite a certain number of individuals to the team to help identify, hey, here's a batch of applications that I've sort of already screened. Help me rank these according to what you think I should consider in making this award. The program managers have the ultimate discretion, but by and large, the awards are going to follow the rankings of these panels. I can tell you that the letters of support, some letters of support can be very wishy-washy, very bland. You can kind of see, well, this PI called up his buddy that he went to grad school with, who's now in a company, and asked them to issue a letter of support. And there's no actual commitment by the company within that letter of support. It's just, hey, we have an interest in you funding this company. It's of great interest to us. That's not really going to do a whole lot for you. It might satisfy some base criteria that you have a letter of support or multiple letters of support. But as a reviewer, I would want to see, hey, this company says if you fund this and they can accomplish what they're saying that they're going to accomplish, we're gonna commit to buy $30 million worth of these products. And so those are the best letters of support. We absolutely intend to buy this product or this component or this service from this individual, or we've already worked with this individual before. We have high confidence in this team. Letters of support that indicate that companies are actually going to turn this into products. They're going to check all the boxes for the program manager and the panelists as well. So remember these things when you're writing your applications, that the goal is clear, the pathway towards the goal is clear, and that you have champions in industry who want to see this commercialized and are willing to support you. Shayn, can you get the next slide?
Yeah, just to kind of go off of kind of what Kevin was saying too, real quick, and just thinking about how you're writing your applications too. Thinking about evaluation criteria. I mean, you see this a lot. I don't know how many folks in here have worked in the government contract section where you have a contract with the government, but you often see bid protests when someone doesn't win a contract. You don't have bid protests with SBR or STTR grants or contracts, but the same point comes up, right? Like you're always judging whether or not someone met the evaluation criteria. So your starting point should be one, taking your pitch deck and making sure that it fits within all the boxes of the evaluation criteria. A big way of doing that when you're talking about innovation and commercialization is one, knowing what the state of the art is. So if you're proposing to do something new, you need to show everybody where it's at. Like where's technology currently at? What's technology currently saying the solution is? And then how does your product or your service different? How does it better? How is it going to change the way things are done? And so for a lot of startup companies, they're kind of used to this. A lot of companies that we work with, emerging growth companies, are used to the pitch deck, right? But a lot of times, research spinoffs or companies that come out through university labs or federal labs are not used to the whole pitch side of things or the letter support side of things. So these things all kind of weigh pretty heavily together.
So different agencies have different requirements and limitations on how you can use the fund. So assuming that you are awarded a grant or a contract, you need to understand what your particular agency's limitations are. So a good example would be the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy may allow you to use some funds for patenting. Either you have a patent you've already applied for a patent and there are some prosecution costs that come up, or you intend to file a patent application. Other agencies are not going to allow that. However, they may allow you to use funds for maintaining a license. So let's say you're a company and you're in licensing a technology, or you have an option to a technology from a university. Well, those funds might be able to go towards maintaining that license. And you can be very strategic about this as well. So if it looks like you are going to receive an award, then you might be able to work with that university licensing partner to structure the deal, the option, the milestone payments, the royalties in a way that qualifies for use of the funds to be able to benefit what you intend to do down the road. Maybe you can save some costs down the road, front load them through use of the funds. Again, there are going to be limitations on this. You can't bring in $150,000 award and spend $100,000 of it on just the rights to whatever you're doing. Similarly, you're not going to be able to spend a huge chunk of the award just on some material component. So maybe you need some sort of instrumentation to be able to advance your technology. Well, there's going to be a limit to how much you can spend on that. The different federal agencies have different requirements. And that's where you get into the specific language. Unfortunately, while we talk about SBIR and there's sort of a central SBIR, STTR website, when you start drilling down into these different questions, when you take some of the modules for how to use funds or go through the frequently asked questions, they're going to say, oh, well, you need to go to this agency to find out what they say about that. So hopefully you have some personnel within your organization who can help answer those questions for you, or you can find good resources that really spell this out. What are the limitations? Can you make a profit from use of the funds? Well, yes, you can earmark a profit for your business. You can also spend up to a certain amount on indirect costs, so administrative costs. So if you are a small business working with a university, or if you are a university, You may have some policy limitations. Typically, we see carve-outs for this kind of funding within universities to allow those caps to be honored, to bring in that funding. So just kind of understand what the limitations are there. You will, if you're new to this space, if you have not engaged in federal contracts before, you're going to want to get some expertise in this area quickly. It's not such an uphill climb as some make it out to be, but there are particular budget requirements in how you are utilizing funds, how you are tracking the use of funds that go into your reports. And so remember that this is kind of a different beast when you're dealing with the federal government. But ultimately, if you want to sell to the federal government anyway, or partner with the federal government, you're going to have to know all this stuff. So you could work with independent CPAs or service providers in this space, hire an independent contractor, look towards a university office, which can help you with this to really understand what you need to do. We mentioned IP rights earlier, and flowing down those rights and making sure that you have the rights that you need that ultimately go into commercialization. So remember that everyone along the food chain has to have some understanding of where these rights are going. And so that's the reason why you have, with the STTR program, there is a requirement that you submit an intellectual property agreement in advance of the award. So you may get an indication that, hey, we're ready to fund you. Now we need to see the IP agreement between the business and the university that spells out who's going to get the IP. Is it going to be jointly owned? If it's patentable, is it going to be jointly owned? If it's data, are there any limitations on the use of data? Ultimately, the program manager, they don't have lawyers sifting through this. They just want to see that you have an understanding, that you've agreed to it, that you've at least addressed everything on the front end, so that you don't get into a situation where the federal government is funding a business that then gets into a huge litigation with the university. This is kind of what happened with Stanford v. Roche several years ago, where you had a Stanford PI that went to work for Roche company on the side because there is a permission that you can engage in so much consulting. And then there was a dispute over who owned the valuable rights to a therapeutic that had been developed. Was it Stanford, who received the first assignment of future technology rights, or was it Roche that subsequently received an assignment of future technology rights from the individual, but it had different language? And so if you look at this, is the epitome of legal jargon, this case, but it's important because billions of dollars can turn on what did the IP agreement actually say, who actually has the rights to this. And so no program manager wants to come under hot water for funding some technology that then gets put on a shelf or gets into the hands of a patent troll or winds up in a huge dispute. Something like CRISPR, where you've got MIT and Berkeley fighting back and forth, and lots of companies are attached to who might win because they all have contracts invested in it. So having as much clear language on the front end as possible. And then again, just the agency quirks, how you can use the funds, make sure you have a clear understanding of that. You can use the same platform technology for different awards. You can have a particular thing that you want to develop, a particular product that you want to take to market, and you can apply to multiple agencies. There's nothing that says, well, only one application a year and only, one dance partner a year. We have clients who have multiple different funding instruments going into basically the same project, but the reports are different. The promises to those federal agencies are different because they have different interests in what they're looking at. So just kind of understanding what are the quirks in terms of the reports, use of funds, partnership requirements, and that's the best way to comply. Just knowing early what you're getting into.
Just to kind of piggyback off of the earlier perfecting IP point, I think attached to the registration, we had a link to kind of a brief explanation of that Stanford case. And I mean, really, it's written in a pretty short, condensed example that doesn't even talk about the actual like reading a court decision or anything like that. But also, I mean, just for startups in general, I mean, when we're working with like a private equity sponsor, VC, and doing diligence, I mean, the first thing that we always look for is agreements in place between, I mean, even in non-SBIR context, agreements between the company and the employees of the founders to see who owns the intellectual property. I think if you read that article I sent, there's an example at the very beginning about a deal that I worked on around last year where the developers of the technology were the company was selling their business for a lot of money, and the developers of technology were actually out of the country and tracking down somebody in Ukraine who contributed to a non-material part of the technology once they'd left the subcontractor is very, very difficult and pushes closing back. So, you know, these things really do roll over outside of the SBIR context. When you're talking about startups and technology, you're talking about obtaining IP rights. So that's just always something, a best practice to have, that the SBIR program, STTR program kind of forces you to implement, at least with regard to the STTR program. So I'm gonna jump, I think we're gonna kind of jump off the PowerPoint here and go more towards question and answer.
Yeah, that's great. So we have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we've kind of discussed some of these, and I'm just going to pull some of these out, and then we're also going to address the chat questions. And just, you know, for a heads up, if we do kind of run up on time, we'll be creating an article that tries to address as many questions as possible and provides all the resources and links that we've discussed here. And hopefully Allie can share that in the Lab to Market newsletter in the next iteration, just a link there so you can go visit that, or launch it so you can house that article. So we'd love to do that. So if we don't address your question, just understand that it's on our minds, and we plan to get that information to you if we can. So we kind of talked about the best way to approach the application process. I think there is a myth that, well, only the companies that the agencies know, or only the universities, the big name universities, are going to get these awards. That's absolutely not true. And I would say that there actually is a lot. There's a lot of, it's interesting psychologically. There's a lot of groupthink when it comes to the different panels and how they consider applications. By and large, the ranking tends to be pretty close together. There aren't a lot of huge outliers. But it does matter whether the applicant has addressed what the program manager, what the agency is looking for. That doesn't mean that they need to go find some star PI at a university to have on their application. It just means that, hey, I've got somebody who's we're able to look at their CV and say, hey, this person they know their way around this technology. They can perform this work. It's almost more important that a company has some sort of devoted personnel to actually taking this to market. You know, do they have a good business plan around this? Do they have a good way forward, so that we trust that they're not just trying to fund themselves to do some research? So, so I would say, you know, best way to secure champions in the agency, your letters of support, maybe considering working with a consultant who can really help you write a strong application. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of very successful companies who have taken SBIR funds and turned that into private equity investment or rolled up companies around those early SBIR grants have utilized those. So absolutely nothing wrong. There's nothing sleazy with working with SBIR consultants to prepare your application and prepare your team for getting this funding. But I would say it's a myth that the program managers or the panelists think that, oh, well, these people are working with this university or this company, and so that automatically I'm going to discount all the others. we've kind of taken a look through some of the review processes. How do you keep abreast of new investment opportunities? Well, Shane's covered that. Just some different resources to go to look at what are going to be the program interest on the horizon. And I would say that this market moves. I mean, you're all familiar, I think, at this point with the major hack over the last couple of weeks that's become big news. Pretty much all of Wall Street and most of our federal agencies have succumbed to a pretty major hack. So you can expect that encryption is going to be funded next year. That new technologies around cybersecurity. It may not sound like it's important to the NIH, but that's definitely going to be on their minds, and you're going to see this funded through everyone from the DOE to NSF to NIH. Possible long-term development after SBIR. Shayn, do you want to go over that?
Yeah. So a few things. So one of the earliest times I really got acquainted with SBIR companies was as a mergers and acquisitions attorney, where I was representing defense contractors in acquiring small businesses that had phase ones or phase twos, early stage phase twos, not like the subsequent grants, but basically let's just say early phase ones that the buyer was trying to, oh, this looks good. And so that they could use that phase one award and build off of that in the future to get a phase two and kind of get a sole source contract with the customer. I mean, these are big defense contractors that are doing this. It's also, strategic mergers between other small businesses, I guess defined by the NAICS code. But outside of that industry too, we're talking about commercialization and going to the next step. So I mean, you can't live in the SBIR world forever. You have to find some other strategy. And we work a lot of times with early stage companies, but we also work with investor groups. And a big part of that is determining, it's good in a lot of ways to see companies that do have SBIR funding, because one, there's a potential market in the fact that you have a government customer. There's also a potential market in a private customer that you can have there. You have proof of concept. And so obviously the investors are more than happy to see some funds come in the door with non-revenue companies or pre-revenue companies that isn't diluting them or diluting the founders. So SBIR is really good. So, but it's important to take the SBIR and use it to get to the next level, whether it's working with other government contractors, whether it's through an acquisition or using your technology to be a subcontractor on a government procurement of a government contract, which you can find through BetaSAM, or if it's staying entirely private or leveraging your SBIR awards and leveraging your technology to get in front of investors that really do think very highly and favorably on those awards. So it's a mistake to just get these awards and then think that that's the purpose of it. I mean, you got to be thinking towards what the next step is. And that's kind of what Kevin was saying too. I mean, there's a lot of private companies that are moving into the space right now, especially intelligence community work is going to be on the rise. Blockchain technology, using things that are in the commercial market and bringing them into the public markets is going to be a big thing here in the future. You're kind of already seeing some Palantir going public, which is kind of founded on that same type of system. Yeah, and I want to run to another comment here by David just real quick. So I tried not to get into the weeds on this, but when you're defining a small business, for government contracts purposes, it's different than for SBIR purposes. But basically, you're going to be under that 500 employee count, but you have to look at your ownership and control. So majority owned and controlled by US-based companies is the thing here. It gets a little bit nuanced when you're going up the chain, right? Once you've got another entity involved that's owned by foreign entities. But the big rule to look out for there, other than the particular details, is the affiliation rules, right? So if you're not talking about a venture capitalist private equity ownership, but a conglomerate of other companies that own this, then they are likely going to be deemed affiliated. And so you have to aggregate the employee counts of the whole corporation, right? Like Coca-Cola can't just spin off Coca-Cola Development 6 LLC and then get Small Business Award because, you know, everybody knows Coca-Cola's got more than 500 employees. So, you know, that's probably for another day, another topic, but just, you know, affiliation rules come up heavily there on top of the US based ownership rules.
So I've got a question around how are innovations evaluated and ranked. So I think that's something that would be good for us to address. We're not always talking about technology centric business products or services. So that doesn't mean everything has to be patented or everything has to have, you know, trade secrets or copyrights. You can consider any sort of innovation as something that produces a positive impact that wasn't realized before. So I think we have a lot of healthcare personnel around the state of Tennessee. So one of my favorite case studies, I lived for many years on the West Coast, and Kaiser Permanente was a big healthcare system out there. They had a really interesting sort of beta testing lab where they would just try out different approaches to things, try out different tools and technologies. And one of the most interesting innovations by Kaiser was this. I think it was color purple. It was basically just a sash. So what they identified as a problem within their system was that somebody would be given a prescription order. And this was kind of early on in the rollout of electronic medical records in different places, but somebody would be given a prescription order, say a nurse, and that nurse trying to carry out that order is going to get interrupted several times from point A to point B within that environment. And so they identified, hey, if you get a prescription order, you throw this sash on, nobody talks to you. It's kind of like the green jersey for quarterbacks, because you don't want that person forgetting the prescription order or getting distracted, and that could cost lives. And so that's an example of, hey, that's just a little trick that results in some sort of positive impact that hadn't been realized before. Now, that's probably not necessarily going to be rolled out into a small business, but what could be rolled out in a similar situation is some way for a healthcare system to save money or to get more positive feedback, because positive feedback results in federal funding for healthcare centers. So if you have, for instance, an imaging center that's part of a hospital, and that's where you derive a lot of revenue. So hospitals, those imaging centers are not the loss leaders. That's where they're making money. So they want to get as many people through MRIs or CAT scans or whatever as possible. And so if you can present something that helps to keep that being an efficient flow, then you have the potential for SBIR funding. So one SBIR awardee that I worked with was a consultant who had a hypnosis, basically a hypnosis business. She would come in and she would teach hospital staff how to use hypnosis techniques for children, because this was a major backup point for these imaging centers where a kid is going to freak out going into a tube. And so if you can help calm the child instead of sedating the child, which has its own issues, you can get more people through that program. And that's an opportunity for an SBIR award, because there's nothing patentable there. There may be something copyrightable, but really it's about what's the positive impact that you're bringing to the table that has not been realized before. So think about innovation in terms of newness, about positive outcomes, about revenue potential. These are all good things that you want to evaluate as your potential market opportunities that would qualify for these programs.
I guess I'll take the next one, Nick. So this kind of is a similar question to what we get a lot with emerging growth companies in when they're talking about what their valuation is for the purpose of putting together some type of private placement memorandum or some type of offering to sell stock to investors. It goes hand in hand with what's our valuation. So it's not going to be perfect. I mean, there's not, that's the $1 billion, right? If you could figure out what your financial projections are, then hey, let us know. We're going to invest in your company. If you got that algorithm down, then go ahead and let everybody know, because we're in. So you got to be able to show that the market and show where the market currently is. What's the state of the art of the market? How much products are the competitors that you're in? Who are your competitors? What are they providing? What's the market there? And keep your market realistic. I feel like we see this all the time when we're working with entrepreneurs or even listening when we represent investors to pitches. Is the market's like ginormous, and it's like, is that really your market then? So be realistic on what your market is and see what type of financial projections you can get from there. Edgar, through the SEC, is a good place to kind of look through, digging through financial statements, which is kind of miserable, but it's real. And if you can pull out some of that information and put it in your application, I mean, generally, man, the applications you're going against someone else. Somebody else is fighting for that exact same grant or that contract. So the better your application looks and you got financial detail in there to show and support your projections, you'll be okay. But just always think of it in a realistic sense and make sure you're down to earth in your financial projections.
A question about employee salaries. Yes. So you can use the funds to pay employees. The funds don't have to be just for assays or for material cost. You can factor in labor into your budget plan. Different agencies have different controls on the proportion of labor cost and other costs that go into this. But just keep in mind that you have not only technical reviewers, but commercial reviewers. If they see an outlier, they're going to catch it. If you have if you're asking for $1 million and your budget plan is that the CEO is going to be paid $400,000 out of that million over the course of 6 months for work on a project, then that's just it's not going to be funded. So keep in mind, these are market rates. What should you expect to pay for labor, and this is proportional to whatever else they might be doing in work for this company. But salaries can absolutely be part of this. Just like if you were getting funding from a private investor, you're going to use it to grow the business according to however you've been growing it to date. There just are some limitations and stipulations according to the different agencies.
Yeah, and Kevin, that's the fun standard of what reasonableness, the ever-moving target of what salary is reasonable. So you can get creative there. One thing I think people suggest is find out what your competitors are paying, but that's often difficult to find.
So I think we can close on just a couple of statements, and I'll invite Shayn to comment on this. But one of the reasons why SBIR funding is so favorable, particularly for investors, angel investors, corporate investors, institutional investors, is that this is really sort of the seed funding that can go to work out quirks or to acquire some material or instrumentation or get some of the baseline stuff out of the way that's not going to eat into the private equity dollars, which really need to be spent very, very wisely. And so this is an important part of the overall financing structure where you don't have to pay anybody back. If you're a small business, you're not giving up a percentage of your company for these funds. You're not agreeing to pay interest on these funds. It is federal funding for you. And it's a great source that's an alternative source of funding to other routes where you want to package this together or better position your founders or even your investors by using this funding in combination with other funding streams.
Yeah, phase one, it's just all about viability. Is it possible? Is it feasible? Does it make sense? So it's really a good way to get your MVP, your minimum viable product out there and test the market first before you take in that type of money, even pre-seed money when we're seeing money coming through safe instruments or convertible notes. I mean, safe instruments, a great example. I mean, even though there's not a valuation of your business happening there, you take a look at some of the stuff that we attached there as resources to the Eventbrite. I mean, there's links there where it talks about even pre-seed safes. I mean, they have a valuation cap, which there's not a valuation there, but you're implying some type of valuation of your business. So, which can hurt your equity in the future. But this isn't one of those situations. This is basically, there's strings that are attached, but not to the same extent as even if you're getting investment through a safe note. We have some other ones in the comments that are coming in as well. Thanks for that comment about the labor rates. Yeah, that's right. There's definitely, labor department has salary statistics if you can tie it to a particular job as well, particular role.
And I know we're at our hour, so I do want to be respectful of that. But there are more questions in the chat, and I know ones that we didn't get to cover. So we'll address as many of those as possible in that follow up. Any final thoughts from you guys?
No, this is we're in a wonderful state for entrepreneurship, and it's so fantastic that we get to do these kinds of events with Allie. So just pay attention to everything Launch Tennessee is doing. Follow their different networks. We put out really interesting articles, fun articles. So consider checking out our newsletter and some of our blogs as well.
Well, I appreciate you guys for spending your time with us. So thank you for your knowledge and expertise, and thank you all for joining us. Probably later this week, we'll go ahead and send out the recording and any sort of other follow-up materials. So I've got everybody's email, I think, that signed up. If for some reason you're joining and you didn't sign up, shoot me an email at ally@launchtn.org, and I can make sure you get that information as well. So thank you so much, everybody.
Great job, guys. Thanks.
Bye.